have joined us today, and I'm very pleased to announce that we have hundreds of participants who are joining this event not only in the Zoom meeting but also from our YouTube channel at the moment. Dear participant, to officially open this webinar, we are pleased to listen the keynote speech that is delivered by the head of the Bureau Organization and Governance at the Ministry of Finance, Ibu Ari Wahyuni. Good afternoon, Ibu.
Good afternoon, Mbak. Ini Mbak siapa nih? Mbak
Nela,
Siti ya?
Ibu.
Oh, Mbak Nela. Oke.
Yes. Okay, Ibu
Kabar?
Ari, the screen is yours, please.
Oke. Thank you, Mbak Nela. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Good afternoon, esteemed guests and colleagues. First and foremost, I'd like to extend my warm welcome and heartfelt gratitude to Mr. Edward Ernst, hopefully I'm not mistaken for pronouncing, Chief of the Microeconomics Policies and Jobs Unit at the International Labour Organization. It is truly an honor to have you with us today as our distinguished speaker. I'm also delighted to welcome all participants joining these webinars, where we gather to address the defining challenges of our times, future-proofing the workforce. Ladies and gentlemen, we are living through a time of rapid and profound transformation. According to the World Economic Forum's Future of the Job reports, nearly 44% of core job skills are expected to change by 2025. That means almost half the skills we rely on today may no longer be relevant within just a few years. And Indonesia is no exception. With a workforce of over 140 million people, our country faces a dual challenge: embracing technological innovation while ensuring our workers remain competitive in a fast evolving global economy. Furthermore, I would also like to share with Mr. Ernst, at the Ministry of Finance, we have made continuous effort to transform our organization to stay agile and future ready. We have restructured our system, simplified business process, and embraced digital solutions across key directorates, including Treasury, Taxation, and Custom. As the head of the Bureau of Organization and Governance, I have witnessed this transformation unfold over nearly 2 decades. These efforts have led to faster, more accurate services, fewer errors, and greater operational efficiency. In recent years, we also began integration artificial intelligence to improve internal process, enhance data-driven decision-making, and build competencies across our human resource. And to the words, AI is not just tools. It is force that is reshaping the future of works. At the ministry, we have applied AI to optimize revenue collection, strengthen customs supervision through intelligent data, and streamline official correspondence through automation. Looking ahead, we are expecting its use in fiscal innovation, risk management, and forecasting to enhance the quality of public services. At the same time, we recognize that AI comes with the risk, bias, misinformation, manipulation, and transparency gaps. That's why ethical and accountable governance is essential as we adopt these technologies. But to fully prepare for these futures, we need more than just tools. We need collaborations. Only through strong partnership between governments, private sectors, and educational institutions can we build the systems, skills, and mindsets needed for the future of works. One of the key themes is to the discussion is reskilling and upskilling, and its urgency cannot be overstated. The World Bank reports that nearly 40% of Indonesia's workforce is employed in sectors highly vulnerable to automation, such as agriculture, manufacturing, and retail. Without action, millions of jobs could be at risk. To address this, we must ensure that skills development initiatives are essentiality to all segments of society, including communities in remote and underserved areas. While Indonesia has made notable progress in expanding internet access, gap in digital literacy remain, especially between urban and rural regions. Closing this digital divide is crucial if we are to build a workforce that can fully participate in the digital economy. As we face these disruptions, one thing becoming increasingly clear: the futures belong to those who are willing to learn, unlearn, and relearn. And an AI-driven world, learning cannot stop at graduation. It must become a lifelong process. At the Ministry of Finance, we are embedding this mindset into our organizational culture. We provide our employees with the access to structured training, self-training platform, mentoring programs, and collaborative knowledge sharing initiatives. These efforts not only help individuals' growth, they also strengthen our institutions and enable us to adapt faster to the challenges ahead. Dear audience, the future is not something that simply happened to us. It is something that we have to build together. By investing in the skills of tomorrow, we empowered our people to face change with confidence, creativity, and resilience. To the government institution represented here today, I encourage you all to champion innovation and develop inclusive policies that help our people thrive, both in public service and the broader economy. To the public, take ownership of your learning journey. Seek out new knowledge, embrace digital tools, and advocate for lifelong education within your communities. Because together we can create not just a workforce that is future-proof, but a generation that is truly future-ready. It is now my great honor to introduce our speakers, Mr. Eckhard Ernst, a global thought leader on labor market trends, the future of work, and the transformative impact of technology. Mr. Ernst, our speaker, will share insight on how AI and automation are reshaping global employment and what we must do to ensure our workforce involved with it. We are privileged to have you with us, Mr. Ernst, to guide us through this critical conversation and to help us take bold, informed steps toward a resilient and adaptive futures. Thank you all for your attention. I look forward to an enriching discussion ahead. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Well, thank you, Ibu Ari, for the keynote speech. Ibu Ari, we understand that you may have other commitments, so please feel free to leave the webinar at your convenience. We are truly grateful for you making the time to be present today. Once again, thank you, Ibu Ari.
Thank you, Mbak. Sukses selalu ya semuanya, teman-teman.
Terima kasih, Ibu.
Aku izin pamit.
Baik, terima kasih banyak. Ladies and gentlemen, now it's time for the main event that we have been waiting for. But before that, I'd like to make a housekeeping announcement for our audience. Ladies and gentlemen, our honorable guests, if you don't mind, please keep your camera on and your microphone muted throughout the entire session. The talk will go on about 45 minutes, followed by 20 minutes Q&A session. And if you are joining from Zoom, you can either ask the question by click on the raise hand button, and then I will call your name, or you can write it down your question in the Zoom chat, and then our team will read it for you. And if you're joining through the live streaming on YouTube, please write down your question into the live chat, and I also will read your questions. And for the participants, do not forget to fill the evaluation form. The evaluation form will be shared at the end of the session. Only those who fill in the evaluation form will get eligible to the certificate. Well, ladies and gentlemen, now allow me to introduce our distinguished speaker, Eke Hart, who will deliver his talk about future-proofing the workforce. Eke Hart Ernst is the Chief of the Macroeconomic Policies and Jobs Unit at the International Labour Organization, where he analyzed the impact of macro trends on unemployment, wages, and inequalities. His current focus is on the future of work, developing scenarios related to the technological innovations, demographic shifts, and political changes in the labor market. His recent research highlights that many developing countries face remittances trap that impedes long-term economic progress, despite significant private income inflows. He has also studied the effect of housing market dynamics and financial friction on job creation and inequality. Before joining the ILO in 2008, Eke Hart worked at the OECD and the European Central Bank. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Eke Hart. Hello, Eke Hart, good morning.
Hello, thank you, Nella, for the introduction.
You're welcome. Is it okay? Are you ready for the presentation?
Yes, yeah, I'm ready to go.
Okay. Excellent. All right, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, allow me to present to you our speaker, Eke Hart Ernst. The screen is yours, Eke Hart.
Thank you very much. I'll just put this full screen, and so you should be able to see it. Thanks a lot for the introduction. Thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to be with all of you. I really am looking forward to an enriching discussion, and we had already some interesting insights to kick us off. What I wanted to do in the next 45 to 50 minutes is to kind of place a bit the discussion around technological change and artificial intelligence in particular in the broader context of how the world of work is shifting, and obviously with a focus specifically towards Southeast Asia and emerging Asia, which is where you are all located. So I said I'm working for the International Labour Organization. Might not be familiar for all of you. It's a specialized UN organization in Geneva, Switzerland, where we focused on international labor standards and analyzing the world of work. My responsibility in particular is to publish regular reports on labor market outlooks. We just published one last January. If you look up on our website, you can find a lot of the insights that I'm just sharing today with you already in that report as well. Maybe just again as a context for what I'm trying to give you here is I think what I'm trying to always try to kind of place the discussion around technological change and future of work in a context of what is commonly known now as polycrisis, the different interconnected challenges that different regions of the world facing. Technological change obviously being only one aspect of, we have, especially in the global north, aging population, but it's also affecting a lot of countries in your neighborhood. I mean, China obviously is as one example, but you have other countries in emerging economies as well that are currently undergoing this demographic shifts, and that will affect somehow as well the capacity of countries to adjust to these needs. And then climate change is obviously on everybody's mind, and I think that in particular what we are kind of faced in the last few months, I would say, is that the whole discussion on globalization, trade and integration, and migration was already mentioned. I want to focus in particular on the first part of this slide, and then going a bit into some of the other aspects around slowing productivity growth and uncertainty around trade and migration. Now, when I think it might be useful to kind of just to put everybody on the same level to say, what are we talking about when we're talking about artificial intelligence? And I've tried to kind of summarize this bit in the slide here, kind of to give you the key features that in my sense are really relevant when it comes to this discussion around AI. The first one is, and it's really an essential part of why we are seeing this explosion of these new tools, is that in the past 20, 30 years or so, with the introduction of smartphones, with the digitalization and the interconnectedness on the through the internet, a lot of the information that we all produce on a daily basis is being large databases. So I think that's really kind of the key ingredient for what you saw. And then on top of that, you saw a development of new mathematical statistical tools that allow to exploit patterns, to understand the patterns behind these data. Now, artificial intelligence as a topic is not really new. It has kind of, the term was coined in the 1950s actually, but at that time people did not have necessarily the necessary access to the data or the computing power. The computers at the time were very slow. They were not capable as much as they are now. And so only with the advent of smartphones in the early 2000s, we actually saw this proliferation of capacity of doing adding all this computing power to actually exploit the data. And I think that the last point I wanted to add, and I will come back to this at the very end of my presentation, is the idea of blockchain. Blockchain is an adjacent technology. It's not really linked to artificial intelligence, but it helps to exploit the possibility from a market perspective to use these tools in a way that help to kind of make our economies work more smoothly, exchange information more transparently, and in a more rapid way. So one of the things that we will discuss at the end is that blockchain can help actually in the process of skills delivery and skills certification. I will get back to that. Now, on the point of AI, I think that for those of you following the news, the media, you've seen that we are making headlines again. There was the first wave in the early 2010s after the financial crisis, with the first kind of wave of new tools that were developed at the time. Now we have these large language models, and again, there's a proliferation and a fear of all jobs being replaced by AI. You saw that some CEOs of large companies came out recently. Dario Amodei here predicts that half of all entry-level jobs will disappear. And I think I wanted to, with that presentation, also kind of maybe reassure you to a certain extent that we don't necessarily see that going forward. And there is obviously a challenge for labor markets, but not to the extent that some of these tech developers are actually seeing it happening. What is true is that in comparison to previous, even digital technologies, the speed with which these tools are diffusing through the economy and being adopted by people is really amazing. Here, this is a chart that was published by Yahoo Finance some months ago on how quickly you reach the first 100 million monthly users of certain technologies. And you saw on the right, like Google Translate, it took them almost 80 months before 100 million users would use Google Translate. Even technologies like taxi drivers, Uber, or messaging services like Telegram spend a lot of time before you reach a certain critical mass that would allow people to really benefit from an efficient service. ChatGPT, on the other hand, on the very left side of this chart, almost instantly, I mean, within 2 or 3 weeks, reached 100 million users. And I think now on a daily basis, you have obviously not only ChatGPT, you have Claude, you have Mistral, you have some other tools as well. They're all constantly being used and upgrade, and then these companies need to upgrade actually their server capacity to actually serve all these large communities. So the diffusion process is really amazingly fast with these tools. And it is true that it's not only the diffusion, it's the progress that has been made with these tools is really amazing. Here on the left side, this is just a chart on the previous wave of how quickly things have changed. We kind of looked into the patent data at the time, and you can see that until 2010, 2011 or so, there was almost like a stagnation, a gradual increase in terms of patenting around AI. And then only with 2012 and really after the global financial crisis, there was an explosion in patenting, and the chart stops here already 10 years ago. I think in the meantime, the scale will no longer be relevant. And one of the reasons why we see these massive increases, obviously, that these tools themselves have become much better actually answering questions. So on the right, this is a chart taken from an assessment that OpenAI did on ChatGPT, and how good ChatGPT 3.5, I mean, in the meantime, we have already kind of seen a next evolution, but how good the GPT 3.5 would kind of do to perform against standard exam tests. And in many cases, these tools can actually reach close or even surpass human candidates in taking these exams. So clearly there is a sense in which these tools can match human performance, and obviously at a much faster scale as well. But I want to stop this kind of first part here a bit and kind of focus a bit broader into the global labor market challenges, because as I said at the beginning, I think it's important to match a bit the idea of what we're seeing in the global labor market with that technology that comes on top of it. So this is from our report that I mentioned earlier, and I think that one of the first points I always like to emphasize is that despite the last few months that have seen kind of some challenges, we do see that labor markets globally actually performing relatively well. So we have, if you look at the global unemployment rate, we are at a level that is close to or even below historical lows. So we kind of projected for this year 4.9% global unemployment rate. Obviously, in some countries, these numbers vary. It's an average, but we have never seen that so low since the recording of the first global unemployment rates back in the early 1990s, and it certainly has improved significantly in comparison to both the pandemic and the global financial crisis and the Asian crisis in your case back in the late 90s. So I think that there's really a sense in which global labor markets are actually performing much better than they used to, and you can see that part of the reason is look, as you can see that on the right, is that vacancy rate. So the interest of companies to hire people is as a historical high. There was obviously the drop in during the pandemic, but then it's kind of skyrocketed again afterwards. And we are still seeing it in many countries, including in many emerging economies. We are still seeing levels of hiring and demand of vacancies or open vacancies at a historical high level. And that is clearly an indication that the labor markets are quite dynamic and performing very well. Having said that, going forward, maybe there might be some softening going on, but I think overall we can be relatively sure that we don't see these high unemployment rates that we have seen back in the 1990s when labor markets were performing much worse. What is true also is that in those countries where people do have a choice to work less hours, they actually tend to do so. So even though the demand for work is high, per worker, a lot of people choose to work less hours. Now, this is for advanced economies, but I always say this also to my colleagues and friends in emerging economies. This is a picture that you will see in 10, 15 years in your countries as well. Because people get richer, they don't want to work 60 hours a week anymore. They want to work less. If you think about South Korea, for instance, used to be a country that people would work 3,000 hours a year. That's a massive amount of hours. And even if you can't consider that people have very little vacation, people do not want to work that much anymore if they get richer. And so as your economies develop, as they become richer, people will automatically want to work less hours. The problem here is that they often work less hours in industry where you really need them the most. They work less hours in healthcare, they work less hours in highly productive business services, and that's where you would actually want to have them working more and want to attract talent. So one of the challenge and one of the increasing the interest of employers to use technology is actually to fill in the gaps in those sectors, in those industries where you have a decline in the interest of workers to work long hours. Now, that's the rosy part of the picture. Now, as I said, unemployment good, working hours, people tend to work less because they actually feel richer. Having said that, there are some dark spots on the labor market, and one of them is obviously youth unemployment rate. So the unemployment rate for young people is actually not that dramatic. It's always a bit higher simply because in younger age people tend to shift jobs quickly. You see that here, in particular high income countries, this solid line here had really faced relatively high unemployment rates back after the global financial crisis. It went down, significantly, even despite the fact that we had the pandemic in the meantime. You see that also for other countries, you have the decline. The only country group where you don't see this, and that's unfortunately the country group where you are in as well, is the upper middle income countries, but that's mostly dominated by China. But so here the unemployment rate for young people has been stubbornly high and it's not coming down. What is more concerning on top of that is that a lot of young people that are neither employed nor in training nor in education. So what we call the NEET rate, neither employed nor in education or training, these rates have barely shifted over the last 20-25 years. So you can see on the right, and there's obviously a huge gender divide as well. Women typically much higher NEET rates than men. The question is that these people are actually, you don't know what they're doing. They're not in the labor force. They're simply not in any way engaged in possibility to work or to move into productive employment later on, which creates a huge problem for societies to actually ensure that these people will have a long-term perspective on the labor market. And unfortunately, as I said, this number has not come down, so we haven't really seen much improvement there. There was a bit of a blip during the pandemic, but since then, nothing really much has changed. The gender gap is another issue that remains a challenge for some countries in particular. And here, I mean, we did, again, I think this is a repetition of an exercise that we did some 10 years ago as well, with similar numbers. We did a back on the envelope calculation where we just looked into what would happen if certain countries would close their gender gaps, or would at least reduce the gender gap to put them at par with the world level. And you can see that for some countries or some regions, not so much your region, but in countries like Arab states and North Africa, you see that the decline in the gender gap would significantly improve labor market performance and income levels of populations in these countries. And then I think, you know, closing the loop a bit with respect to the tech situation is that one thing where we actually very concerned about is that despite the fact that we all see this advancements in technology and these new tools coming out almost at the daily rate, we don't see it have a strong impact on our capacity to improve our living standards. On the contrary, we see often that where technology is being accelerated, countries not only do not become richer, they sometimes become even poorer, especially certain population. And the part of the reason is that technology, especially digital technology, tends to concentrate among a small number of really big companies. You know, obviously all the big 5 or 6 global tech companies, but even at the local or regional level, tech companies tend to cluster, tend to become extremely dominant in their market. And one of the consequence of this is that they create labor market power, which reduces the capacity for other companies to compete. And it increases wage inequality. And so it not only doesn't help with productivity, it actually makes the situation worse for some of the population, especially at the lower end of the income distribution. And then, I mean, this is not so much for your region, or for your country, it's mostly for some of the neighboring country, and in particular for African countries, is that low income countries in our assessment have been left behind. The share of working poverty has declined globally, but not so much in these countries, and the share of informal employment as well. So informal employment is all those people who have not been able to integrate properly the labor market through a standard labor market contract, or being properly protected by labor legislation and social protection. And so especially in low income countries, this share is still very high. In upper middle income countries, the share actually has declined. Also, it's still above 50% so far. And I think that is, again, a challenge also for countries like Indonesia, that you still have a large part of the population that is not properly covered by labor market contracts, by social protection, by minimum wages, etc. Now, let me go into some of the focus areas, and then we can switch to the part where I talk a bit more about the technology. So focus area 1, and I mentioned it already, is bringing back young people into education. We kind of don't necessarily have to pay too much time on this, but again, I think that if you look at the change in labor force participation rates, especially in upper middle income countries like Indonesia, you see that youth labor force participation rates have declined significantly. Now, if that were in favor of education, that would be a good thing, but it's not necessarily the case. You see that a lot of upper middle income countries continue to face a relatively high need rate that hasn't really kind of changed much. Focus area 2, and I think that's really something where I kind of would like to emphasize very strongly also the situation for Indonesia, is that productivity growth has slowed down everywhere. Now, this is obviously, when you look at the global productivity frontier, you see that it's very much dominated by China, which is the kind of the main performing country here in this chart. But I mean, you look closely into Indonesia. I mean, Indonesia is kind of gradually improving its GDP per capita level, or GDP per person employed. But the productivity growth rate really doesn't took off, and in 2024 you see here it's actually tapering off at the lower level, and much lower than countries that, for instance, had a higher GDP per capita level. So the way you read the chart is that it essentially follows the country from over the last 30 years, sorry. And you look at it, you see that, for instance, South Korea had a much higher GDP productivity growth rate at a higher GDP per capita level in comparison to Indonesia now. And so that is an indication that there is a productivity potential in Indonesia that's not being exploited properly, and that prevents you from moving up faster, in a sense. And I think that's, as a message that we're trying to get across really kind of strongly among our member countries, that productivity should really focus area number one if you want to create decent jobs and increasing in living standards. It's the productivity is really key to these things. And productivity can be done through two things. That's like one major factor is within sector productivity growth. So each sector, whether it's manufacturing, business services, public services, utilities, etc., you need to increase productivity growth within sectors. Part of it, and Asia in particular has been relatively good at this, is to also bring people out of low productive activities into higher productive activities. So bringing them out of agriculture, especially small farm agriculture, into industry and into business services, to ensure that to have this this gradual improvement in your economy. Now the problem is and I get back to that in a minute. The problem is that in countries like Indonesia that are widespread and large, there is a geographical dimension to it. I'll get back to this, but before I do that, I wanted to emphasize one other aspect, and that's related already to the opening remark about skills. So a lot of emphasis is being discussed right now in terms of we should actually all invest in our skills, and especially in our digital skills. Now that's in principle correct. Skills is obviously important, especially when you want to work. You need a certain numeric skills, you need reading skills, you need problem-solving skills. But the digital skills part is often a bit confused because A, nobody really knows what digital skills are, and B, from the evidence we have, and this is for the European Union only, unfortunately, for the previous decade, the evidence doesn't really allow us to draw strong conclusions from it. Here you see that, and maybe the chart is a bit complicated to read, so I'll give you an interpretation. So what does that mean? It actually tells you that somehow having digital skills on your CV is a signaling that you somehow stand out from the crowd, but it's not something that is essential for you to maintain or keep your job. And so our interpretation of this was to say that yes, digital skills are relevant when you are looking for a job, but they're not necessarily something that you need to have a specific focus on when you're employed, not because it's not relevant, but because you will get them in any case. You will learn them on the job. You will get some training or by your employer introduces new machineries, you would automatically adjust to these by having these new tools at your disposal. And so it's not something where you specifically need to focus on neither as a policymaker nor as a training institute, because these things will be these skills will almost automatically be provided. Only if you're looking for a job once you have lost one, then it might become relevant to say, actually, I have invested. And this is an important point, a signaling point, which I will get to in the last part of my presentation. Now, I mentioned spatial inequalities, and I mean, on a good note is, unfortunately, this chart is a bit too small to really make it visible. But you see that for Indonesia here, the spatial inequality has actually declined in the last 10-15 years. So this is spatial inequality with respect to the change in manufacturing, and here is with respect to the change in business services. And in both cases, you see that Indonesia has actually performed very well, and that is an indication that structural change in Indonesia benefited people to become richer. So they moved actually out of poorer areas into richer areas, and by kind of moving out of let's say agriculture into manufacturing and business services. But this is a process that needs to be supported. And especially in countries that are relatively widespread at large, and in the case of Indonesia, obviously with the Thousand Islands, it makes it even more challenging to kind of help people to move around. These processes will need to be supported and will need to have continuous focus for policymakers to ensure that the structural change, the structural shift that I mentioned before, is really being taken care of properly. And then the last point, and I mean, this is not to scare you in any way, but just to kind of highlight the challenges ahead. I was mentioning at the beginning that so far labor markets look very positive. But obviously, with the ongoing uncertainties, especially around trade and supply chain jobs, we do see a particular challenge for especially those countries in Asia, East Asia, Southeast Asia, that are particularly exposed to trade, that will face some challenges. Here for Southeast Asia, actually, so this is from a recent report that I think came out 2 weeks ago by our colleagues in Bangkok. You see that the total share in employment in manufacturing, at least, is not particularly high, but is probably higher than let's say the average, and so you do have. There will be some adjustments that will need to be taken care of if people actually lose their job. So this is such employment linked to US final demand. That doesn't mean that all these jobs will be gone. It just means that if you don't find a way of solving these trade uncertainties and these trade disruptions, some of these jobs might need to be restructured, and people might need to find employment in other opportunities or in other sectors for that matter. So, but the order of magnitude is not that massive. I think we are not talking about 50% of employment that is being exposed. There are some jobs. Make sure that your policymakers are aware of it, that things can happen, and that you put in place a proper policy framework that restructure these things. I mean, one example that is maybe relevant in this context is that Europe has went through a major restructuring, especially in steel and industry in the 1980s, and has it developed a reconversion programs that helped with these structural shifts. Maybe that's something that you already have taken care of or might want to take inspiration from if it comes to providing social security, social support, skills and retraining programs for those people who potentially are being affected by these trade shocks. Now, the one thing that you have all been waiting for is now the third part of my presentation is looking into AI and jobs. And and the evidence that we have so far. So I wanted to start by maybe first of all kind of stressing a conceptual point, which is that when we talk about new technologies, and that's not specific to AI, but AI in particular has this element, it is that we are not talking only about automation. We also are talking about transformation. So a lot of our jobs, and I think that was a bit of the innovation, if you want, in the field of labor economics in the last few decades, is that when you're talking about a job, it's a collection of tasks that we're all doing. There's not only one specific task that we do all the time. We do several tasks, whether it's writing a report, whether it's kind of analyzing data, illustrating, etc. In principle, we have all our jobs consist in several different tasks. That can be analyzed, and only some of the tasks are risked to be automated. Now, some occupations have a relatively high share of these tasks that can be automated, and you see on the right, these jobs typically involve routine type of task occupations. Personal assistants, accountants, for instance, is there's a lot of tasks that can be standardized and automated. But not all of them necessarily will disappear. Some of them will just kind of change and will see a small reduction in employment. Some of them might be transformed dramatically. Here we have, I like actually this example of a lorry driver, in a sense that these jobs, if we really talk about automotive and autonomous vehicles, these jobs are likely to disappear completely and transformed in a way that you only have maybe a drone driver now that's needed, but no longer somebody sitting behind the steering wheel. But then you have other types of occupations where the automation risk is actually low, and a lot of tasks will be transformed so that the task, the same job you're doing, you can actually do it much more productively. Now, some of the jobs that you see here, they have relatively low transformation and automation risk. So trainers and coaches, even a musician. Yes, you can obviously replace a violinist in an orchestra by an AI, but it's not the same. If you go to a concert, you want to listen to the musician or you want to listen to the singer. You don't want to listen. You don't want to look at the screen and see an avatar. So there are certain jobs that are relatively safe. Others are much less so, or rather they kind of change the way that's being done. Medical personnel is one of those examples. If a radiologist or any kind of doctor has better diagnosis tools, they will spend less time on diagnosing a patient and will have more time to actually take care of the patient, which in principle should benefit the health and the recovery process of such a person. Same for scientists or even navigation personnel. So to show you just a picture that not all jobs are necessarily disappearing because we're seeing this introduction of these new technologies. The other thing which is really important to highlight is maybe having a look at previous waves of technological change. So what we did back in a paper in 2018 was to look into what happened with robots. Now, robots and AI is obviously very different, and there are different ways of using them, but it's still interesting to see that the automation part of robots did have an impact. Now, the impact overall was negative, slightly negative on employment. As you can see here, for the world as a whole, employment stocks declined because of robots. They declined much less in developed economies. The impact was relatively mild. And if you look at countries that actually employ robots heavily, like South Korea or Germany, their employment has actually gone up in the meantime. But because of the fact that people moved from those affected sectors into other sectors that were less affected. In developing countries, the story is a bit different. So here the automation risk is quite high, but it has something to do with the fact that you actually have the capacity to to automate quite a few number of tasks, especially in manufacturing. So watch out for the impact on the manufacturing sector. And I think China is a bit of a leading example in the sense that China, already has now what they call dark factories where almost nobody is working anymore. And I think that's something that this transformation, especially of manufacturing, is likely to come to the rest of the emerging world as well, simply because the global supply chains and the integration of these supply chains require a certain level of technicality of how these products are being manufactured. So there's certainly that risk when you look at the previous waves from robots, that AI as well will kind of cost jobs in specific industries in particular. Now we did, as a comparison, we did an overview of AI exposure scores. So these are the scores that the different papers come out with to analyze what kind of occupations are affected in which way by these new technologies. There's a whole range of methodological apparatus behind it. I will not go into this. If you have interest, we can talk about it in the Q&A. But the point is that these scores essentially give you, for each of the occupation that you see underneath in the chart, they give you the average exposure that these different authors have come up with of AI on this occupation. That doesn't mean that they will disappear. Again, as I said, automation and transformation is not the same thing, but it gives you a sense of some of these jobs are more likely to be affected by AI than others. But it's interesting, if you look at the first study that did that, was Fry and Osborne back in 2013, you see that, and sorry, I should mention that the color codes up here is the level of wages. So the greener it is, or the more yellow it is, the higher the wage rate that these occupations are come with. And so if you look at Fry and Osborne here, you see that mostly in their assessment, it was mostly low skilled and low wage jobs that would mostly be affected, transportation, repair, production, etc. Whereas management and financial operations and computer mathematics, and these were less affected. Now that image or that picture has completely shifted. So the most recent ones is Elundo, who kind of came up with so Elundo she's a computer scientist with OpenAI, and there's some other colleagues that work with her on this. And she kind of the group of authors in this paper, they come to the exact opposite conclusion, saying that actually with the latest technologies, with the latest tools, you see that AI is mostly affecting high wage and cognitive jobs like management, like business and financial operations, etc., and not so much the low wage, routine type of jobs. So the story, the jury is out in this sense, because obviously since Fry and Osborne was published in 2013, we, as I said before, we saw a decline in unemployment rate. So clearly their story cannot be true. Maybe Elundo's story is also just only half of the truth that we're seeing. And coming back to what Dario and Mode was saying, that kind of picture that Elundo and Al are giving is also not really exactly compatible with the idea that we're seeing massive transformation of labor markets coming our way. Now, we have done something similar, or rather my colleagues did, and so we have, so my colleagues did something similar to Elundo, but on the basis of a global chart. So we have actually estimates here for the proportion of jobs potentially affected by generative AI across the world, across income levels and across regions. And you can see that, interestingly enough, now with this type of cognitive tasks being targeted mostly, you see that it's mostly high income countries that are being affected. Asia and the Pacific, less so. I mean, obviously, Indonesia here being an upper middle income country, it's also kind of at the higher end of those countries being affected. But if you look at it, what you really want to care about is these red categories, red and orange categories, where you essentially have a lot of jobs that could potentially be automated away. The other one, the low exposure and the minimal exposure, these are jobs that are being exposed, but they're actually unlikely to disappear. And what is really interesting with this scoring here is that overall, for the world as a whole, but also for upper middle incomes, we are talking about less than 20% of jobs that are potentially being affected. Now, my colleagues here have done this really nice chart where they kind of, separated it out into different occupational groups here on the right, and we can click on this and look into some of the jobs and how they're being transformed. And you see that, when you look at, for instance, agriculture and fisheries, there's relatively little that needs to be concerned. Like obviously clerks, these are jobs that can be relatively easily automated. Craft workers again is one of these occupation categories where you see very little shifts happening. Elementary occupation as well. Then managers is a bit different. Plant machine operators again, something that is relatively little affected with minimal exposure. Professionals, again on the opposite end, where high cognitive content can be easily being replaced, at least or automated for some of the tasks. And then services and sales, depending on which type of occupation you're looking at, and technicians as well. And so, so you see that the actual exposure of different occupation is very different. And it's mostly at the high end that we see exposure happening. So as I said, managers and professionals most exposed, whereas others like agriculture and clerks or so at the low income spectrum, I think that these people are relatively safe. They might be affected by the previous waves of automation or robots, etc., but they are certainly not so much affected by AI. Now, I want to spend the last 5 to 10 minutes to kind of shift the perspective a bit, moving away from, let's say, the automation part of it into, can we actually use AI to make our economies work better? So in a sense that rather than seeing AI as a threat for us, seeing it as an opportunity of how to provide certain services, public services, but also private services much better and to the benefit of our economy, so that we actually address that issue that I mentioned before, which is this low productivity issue. Now, first example that I wanted to give is using AI for strategic foresight for career development. And actually, in your neighborhood, there's a country that does it quite well, which is Singapore. And Singapore has used not AI, but a foresight tool, strategic foresight tool, to support transitions. So to identify and to provide career guidance, identify opportunities for people to move through the occupational network. Now you have to think about the labor market as a connection of different occupations. You cannot go from any occupation to any other occupation. If you are an agricultural worker, you will not end up a medical doctor next morning. Maybe it's possible in 5 or 6 years' time, but certainly it will take some time. It will take some massive investment. There are jobs in your vicinity that you can take much more easily. And so understanding this network structure of occupations, so which are the occupations that from your current position you can reach easily, is something that requires a bit of analysis, requires a bit of assessment, and where AI is actually quite useful as a tool to help public employment services in particular, but also private employment providers to identify and to foster what is called a skills ecosystem. But before you do that, you actually need to identify the relevant skills. And part of it is, requires that you actually look into what are the skills coming in the future. What actually are the skills that you're needing? And again, I warn against this idea that we all should go into digital skills because XYZ has said so. Maybe there's other skills that are much more relevant for your economy. So for your future economic development, you might actually need other skills than those that are being discussed in the press. And then, I think that one of the examples I always give is relation to international migration, is obviously that this kind of identification and supporting transitions needs to not only happen at the national level, but ideally also at the global level, to provide a more easily exchange of people where they are most needed, so that you have those people who actually have relevant skills to maybe move around, but also to help countries to fill in their skills gap if they be able to identify them. So the second point is relatively directly linked to the previous one. Is you actually use, when you want to have this ecosystem approach, you need to, at the granular level, identify the overlap of skills. So in the United Kingdom, there was an innovation lab that kind of did an analysis of the UK system, and they kind of identified at a relatively granular level for each sector the similarity to nearest cross-sectoral jobs. So if you have, if you're, for instance, in financial services and you're up here, you have a relatively high similarity with jobs that are here left or right in this chart. So you can actually identify a large group of people that would potentially be moved around if, for instance, in your financial sector you need to scale down, or you have to some banks go bankrupt and you need to bring these people into different sectors. You can actually identify that for some of these people they have similarities to occupation in other sectors. Here in other sectors like media, it's much less common. You will find a lot of occupations that have relatively limited similarity with other sectors nearby. And so this chart or this analysis that you can do with AI helps you to identify what are the possibilities for you to move around and which are the target areas and target sectors where you need to look specifically in order to be able to kind of focus or help those people to move around to different sectors if there is a need. The third one, and I don't want to kind of talk much about the left one because I mentioned this already, but the third one is actually what you need to do as well is to document your working skills experience. You remember what I said at the beginning about blockchain? I think the one important element in our labor markets, especially in labor markets where people spend 40-45 years increasingly now and accumulating experience and skills over their lifetime, it is very important to be able to document, especially those digital skills that you actually have, because a lot of these skills we learn on the job. And even myself, I mean, I know a lot of software packages that I have used, etc. There's nothing is properly documented, nothing is properly certified. And if I were to kind of apply for a job somewhere else, my future employer would have to trust me in a sense, rather than having any kind of documentation that allows him or her to assess what kind of skills and at what level I actually do experience them. So if you look at this chart here, this is from a McKinsey report 2 years ago. They documented how much of your skills is actually implicit related to your work earnings and how much of your skills is documented by, for instance, previous certificates and diplomas. And you can see over your lifetime at the end of at 30 years experience, more than half of your earnings are related to work experience and related to skills that you cannot document properly, that are not certified. So developing micro-credentials, developing tools to document. We're not talking about reskilling. We're just simply documenting the skills that you have. It's really essential for your capability to shift and move around in the labor market and to kind of overcome these occupational hurdles that you see on the left side, where, for instance, you're in healthcare and you want to move somewhere else. You actually face occupational barriers to move out of these occupations. The fourth point I can go very quickly is on scientific breakthroughs. I think what is really important as well is, instead of looking into how we can automate our jobs, AI is really good at analyzing complex systems, screening through large databases and managing networks. And so there's a lot of applications that we can have, especially in science and innovation, where we can help and use these tools to improve, whether it's, improve early warning signals, systems. I mean, I don't have to mention tsunamis in this context, or developing new materials, or kind of improve mobility management. All these kind of network technologies or networks of screening, of analyzing, of early warning systems are really being helped by AI, and there are already good examples on how to use them. And I think scaling these systems up would immensely transform our economies and make them much more productive. I wanted to finish with a quick policy a summary of what I've said so far. I think that it's most of it is self-explanatory, but I wanted to really highlight the importance of this, the first point, the boosting productivity and boosting productivity through promoting high growth sectors. I think that's really an important element of this, is that we should use these technologies not as something that we have to adjust to it, but rather in a proactive, strategic way, either by reskilling or by through industrial policies, by clearly focusing on those sectors where we see massive potential. And that can be through renewable energy, that can be through, as I said, mobility management. It can be simply in traditional manufacturing, where a lot of potential productivity potential is there. And we need to help also to accelerate the structural transformation. I think that Indonesia in particular, but also East Asia or Southeast Asia more broadly, has done a great job in terms of accelerating the structural transformation. We shouldn't stop there. We need to kind of continue doing this. We need to bring out people out of low productive sectors into business services and high skill, high end manufacturing, in order to be able to kind of benefit from the structural transformation. So I leave you with that. We have done a series of reports that you can find here. There's more. If you click on I will share the slides later. If you click on research, or here we have an observatory on AI and work in the digital economy as well at the ILO. You find many more resources that you might be of interest for you. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention. I'm looking forward for the Q&A and for your questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Eckhard, for the insightful talk that you have already presented. And ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to point about what Eckhard have already presented. It's about AI. It's not only being seen as a threat, but it is a tool for augmentation, a means to enhance human potential rather than replace it. By investing in relevant skills, fostering the ecosystem across sectors, and promoting lifelong learning, we can build a workforce that is future-proof and also boost productivity. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for us to go on the Q&A session. And I bet the audience is very eager to ask the question and to hear more from Eckhard. Well, is there anyone who wants to raise hand in the Zoom chat? Okay. Putu Sugiana, would you mind opening your camera? Okay. Please tell us your name and your face, and then you can ask your question. Maybe Tim, would you please unmute the audio? Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Putu. I'm from BGT. Thank you so much for excellent presentation with Mr. Eckhard. I don't know whether I should be happy with this information in regard to the technological advancement, especially on the use of artificial intelligence. Maybe my question back to our basic, actually, in the policy making process. As we may know that Indonesia has an abundant source of people who would like to look for a job, especially looking forward on 2045, that if I'm not mistaken, we will have a demographical bonus. In regard to the technological advancement, especially the use of AI, so what should we, I don't know how we should face this challenge, especially in order to balance the need of people in getting job, and also in order to improve the productivity. If we focus on productivity, maybe the company would like to use the AI instead of recruiting a new employee, especially a new job seeker, fresh graduate, something like that. That's must be less experience, less capabilities compared to if they spend their money on advancing the technology, especially on the use of artificial intelligence. So I think this is the kind of trade-off or dilemma for a country like Indonesia that has an abundance of labor force. So how we should face this unprecedented condition? That's my question, actually. I don't know whether I'm happy to have this kind of new advancement, it is unavoidable. But in a sense, as a country that has abundance of resources, this is I think the trade-off for the government is, do we need to set up industry that capital intensive, including the use of internal technology and artificial intelligence, or we should start with labor intensive because people need work to have their job. Because at the end of whatever we do as government, we need to see the people itself. That's my question. Thank you.
No, thanks a lot. I mean, first of all, let me reassure you that this is not unprecedented times. I think that, you know, we have experienced in other parts of the world similar situations. And I mean, the very first answer to your question is that without the proper macroeconomic environment, without proper you know, support for growth, you will not get sufficient jobs regardless of the technology that you're using. I think that kind of getting stuck in low, you know, low productive and low labor intensive jobs is not necessarily the strategy going forward. As I said before, especially in manufacturing, you will face the shift towards capital intensive production. And that's, you know, China is just one example, and it has something to do with the integration of these industries in the global value chain. Companies will need to kind of correspond, or will need to invest in technologies that make them competitive. So I think that, you know, moving into labor-intensive industries as a way forward, I think it's not necessarily the way forward. What is certainly necessary is that you will need to invest in the skills broadly, not in digital skills, the skills broadly of your young workforce. And I think that one of the challenges that we'll see with these new technologies is that the type of education that we provide for young people will have to change. It will have to include much more critical thinking, much more problem-solving thinking. Also, you know, a report a few years ago we made highlighted is also much more social skills that are necessary. The simple repetition of knowledge, or the regurgitation of knowledge that we all used to it when we were in school, is no longer a feasible strategy. And so I think that what the first part that you need to look into is, what is the education, what is your education system actually delivering? What type of education does it deliver? And whether maybe you need to bring in some additional private providers of education services that help to upgrade these things. I think that, you know, that would be my answer to you, is that you have the potential, and Indonesia being a large country with a large domestic market, you have the potential to actually grow yourself out of these problems, but you need to provide enough growth. As I said before, the productivity growth in Indonesia in comparison to previous waves of, you know, Asian tigers is not strong enough, and part of it has to do with the fact that somehow internal drivers of domestic demand are not strong enough to provide that additional boost to employment to bring everybody into decent jobs.
Okay, thank you very much, Eckhard and Putu, for the question and answer. Well, we are going to jump into the next question from Miss Maratika Pujilestari. Would you please unmute your audio and ask your question? Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can you hear my voice? Okay, okay.
Yes, that's good.
Thank you for the insightful presentation, Mr. As we know, here in Indonesia and also in Jakarta, we know that the inequality of income is getting bigger, getting higher. Like we know the Gini ratio is even higher after COVID. after the pandemic era. And also we know that the sector that being the biggest contributor in Jakarta is the wholesale and retail trade sector. Therefore, my question is, what kind of join-up approaches do you think are needed to reduce regional inequalities and protect jobs in areas that depend heavily on global trade and supply chains? Because we know also that wholesale and retail trade also depend to the price of commodity, and also like the recent Trump effect, the Trump tariff effect, it also impact the sector of wholesale and retail trade. Maybe that's all. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot. I'm on trade. I think, I mean, we are all facing the same challenge. Let's be honest about this. And I think that we are in a new environment where, you know, countries need to adjust to that. We have to see what kind of comes out of these negotiations, also bilateral negotiation. But I think that, you know, from our perspective, the globalization, the previous waves of globalization have been extremely beneficial, especially for countries in Southeast Asia. And I think we're going back now and you know, undoing these waves of globalization that we have seen previously would be really not the right way forward. So I mean, my suggestion would always be, you know, try, and that goes to both sides, you know, both emerging economies and also the advanced economies, try to find common ground in changing and making sure that we kind of find new ways of reaching trade agreements. Obviously, trade agreements that do protect workers. I think, you know, the ILO, we have very strong views on how these trade agreements need to integrate certain labor provisions in order to ensure that international labor standards are being protected, especially when it comes to issues as you mentioned before, like minimum wages or social protection provisions, etc. I think these we don't want globalization go hand in hand with an erosion of labor standards. And I think in the past there have been very good examples. I mean, I'm just thinking about the trade agreement with Vietnam, etc. That where you know, provisions have been made and have helped both sides, actually both labor markets in advance and emerging economies, to benefit from these agreements. So I mean, yes, we have to adjust to that new reality, but it also means that we kind of maybe take advantage of the lessons learned from the past. The second point, and I think I concluded my presentation is I do think that you need to be strategic in terms of which industry do you want to develop. I think it's important to say, yes, we want to develop certain high-skilled industries, but you also need to see to what extent you, for instance, kind of force foreign providers, foreign investors, you know, to make sure that they actually invest also in the workforce development. There is a recent example or recent discussion about what happened in China again, where analysts kind of pointed out to the fact that Apple, for instance, provided in significant services for local capacity building, local engineers, local technicians, etc., that were skilled or trained by suppliers that work for Apple. And I think that that's something that, you know, is maybe an example that you also want to follow, because the key point always with skills and training is it has to reflect market demand. A lot of governments think that they just send up a vocational training system and that will automatically kind of solve their training requirements. And often these training systems, these training centers, they provide training that is completely, or not completely, but I mean to a large extent, of what the market wants to have, what the market needs. And I think that, integrating industrial development with vocational training is something that you need to probably focus much more strongly, and also looking into, let's say, a regional aspect. As I mentioned before, I think Indonesia did very well in terms of its spatial inequality, but that needs to continuously be a focus. You can't just concentrate all the activity around major industrial centers. You really need to kind of see to what extent other areas in the country can benefit also from industrial policies and specific efforts to develop local economic hubs.
Well, thank you very much, Eckhard, and we are going to go to the next question from Ms. Embun. Would you please unmute your microphone and turn on your camera? Ms. Embun, hello? Hello, Ms. Embun?
Hello, yeah. Thank you, Mr. Eckhard, for the insightful presentation. I already typed my questions on the chat, but I just read it for you right now. Someone says we are not going to be replaced by AI, by the people who can use AI. And also AI has also its flaws, especially hallucination effect, in which we provided low quality data and unverified data to AI. In addition, data is already plentiful on the internet. So the point is not to finding the right answers, but to ask the right questions, specifically skills to prompt questions to AI. What are your takes on this opinion? Thank you.
Well, I mean, as I mentioned before, I think that, repeating or trying to kind of being better at these tools in terms of knowledge and repetition, I think will be a doom to fail. I mean, even if you're an expert in your area, and I include myself in this, I often use these tools myself to maybe document myself on certain points that I might have learned in a university, but I'm no longer, remembering. And so I mean, these tools are useful, for knowledge generation or regurgitation, if you want. So in that sense, you're right. I think one of the skills that we probably need to ask or to have is asking the right questions. And I mean, I would put that under the umbrella of saying we need to have these problem solving skills. I think that is really something which is really important, to understand the issue at stake. What is the problem that we have? How do we need to solve it? And what are the methods that we're using? And these tools can then come on top of it to help us maybe to document certain answers, etc. Also, critical thinking will be very important. I mean, I don't know what your experience was with these tools, but I always find that what is extremely frustrating when using at least the current version of it is that these tools never come up with an answer saying, I don't know. They always know. They always come up with an answer. And that's not really what you experience in real life, because sometimes there is really no answer to a question. And I think that having these tools and always coming up with an answer is something that you would need to kind of really critical think about it. And so, asking questions, critically reflecting on the answers that you get, and then maybe asking follow-up questions is really something that I would agree with you is an essential skill. Again, as I said before, this is part of the reflections of what type of training do we need to provide our young people, and maybe also our adult citizens. What is it that we need to teach them in school? How do we need to kind of train them properly? And I think that, obviously learning and repeating and, regurgitating knowledge will continue being part of it, but it might become less and less important over the next decade than it used to be in the past.
Well, okay. Thank you, Eckhard, for the answer. And then we are going to move to another participant who has already raised her hand, Ms. Ika Istaka Tariana. Yeah. Would you please, ma'am, to unmute your microphone?
Thank you for the opportunity, and I thank you to Mr. Eckert for the presentation that will be more insight for our in Ministry of Finance. I think that the research that you're doing in your institution is more for the private sectors, especially for the manufacturers and industry. I just would like to know whether the research is also included in the area of government sector. I mean, it is true that this insight is impact for the policy for the government to take for the future and if we are in Ministry of Finance is in budgeting for the state budget, and then the also for the local budget, but for I mean, I would like to question whether the research itself is included in the area of government sectors, especially for the manpower for the government. Is it has the impact of lowering the manpower in government itself? Have you researched about this? And the second question is about the other factor of the research. Has you, I mean, if the research is doing in different countries, there is a factor of culture. I think the culture itself, not all of the culture could be substituted by the AI. Some cultures would be need manpower, and still the AI is just a tool for the job or working. So how do this aspect for you regarding the research with the AI? Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. So on the first point, you're absolutely right. I mean, we are looking at these tools from an occupational point of view. So by different categories, as I mentioned, managers, professionals, clerks, accountants, etc. And not so much by sector. I mean, I mentioned manufacturing because we did some previous work on industry, but we actually don't necessarily distinguish in much detail to what extent this affects the government sector, and partly because the data on this is actually quite poor. So and so, I mean, I would say that I'm not an expert on how to reform a Ministry of Finance, whether it's yours or any other country's Ministry of Finance, in order to make sure that these technologies are properly used. These are often highly specialized applications. What I can say is that we do, when it comes to Ministry of Manpower or Ministry of Labor, you do have some case studies where we look into this, especially when it comes to labor inspection. We have some colleagues that have worked on this. For the lack of time, I couldn't really go into detail today, but there is information, data. If you want, I mean, you reach out to me. I'm happy to share with you that information. And so the point is that specific applications will benefit from a tax collection. You mentioned revenue collection. I think is one of these custom processes, etc. is another example of where these tools are probably used and or can be used. My point always was to say that public infrastructure provision in particular can benefit enormously. Mobility management. I mean, I have only been once to Jakarta, and I have to say I've never experienced a worse traffic jam in my life than in that time when I was in Jakarta. And I'm not sure whether it has improved in the meantime, but I'm pretty sure that proper mobility management would help traffic to become much more fluid, even in countries or in cities like Jakarta. So there's for me an obvious example. Another one is electricity management. Waste management is also something which is really important. And again, as I said, I mean, there are many other kind of examples like early warning systems when it comes to natural disasters is very important. When you look at in a country where I'm based in Switzerland, they make use of highly sophisticated digital tools, including satellite scans, etc., to make sure that, for instance, in mountainous regions, when landslides can happen, that people are being warned early enough so that they can rescue endangered populations. So there's plenty of examples where you can enhance your governance capacity without necessarily laying off people. It's not a point of laying off people. It's just making those people that you have in your administration making the job much more effectively than they use. So I think you're absolutely right, but this would really require sector-specific expertise in order to be able to identify where exactly you can benefit from these tools. On your second point of culture, what is really interesting with these tools is that yes, they are developed by mostly American tech companies, now also Chinese, but they do have flexibility in terms of retraining them and adapting them to your local cultural context. And I think, this is where these tools are actually surprisingly flexible. It's not like a machine that you put in and you build in somewhere in Germany and shipping over to Indonesia and that's it, and the machine cannot be changed. You really have a computer that can be adjusted to your local context. If only like what in this example here in this webinar today with having translation into Indonesian. I think that that's a basic example, but you can broaden it obviously to make sure that that other cultural aspects are being properly reflected. And so I would say that these tools are actually surprisingly flexible to be adapted to your local context.
Well, okay, thank you very much, Eckhard. And ladies and gentlemen, in the interest of time, I'd like to close with a question from our audience who has already raised his hand. Ms. Arisandi Joan. Yeah. Do you mind opening your microphone?
Thank you, Ms. Nela.
And Ms. Arisandi, if you don't mind, please be quick due to the time arrangement that we have.
Okay, I'll be quick. Good afternoon, Indonesia time, Mr. Eckhard. Mr. Eckhard, my name is Arisandi Jono Diputra, an employee at the Ministry of Finance of the Republic of Indonesia. Regarding your presentation earlier, I think it's in the very opening of your slide, you mentioned that our population is rapidly aging. On the other hand, there are numerous issues related to the younger generation, particularly concerning their work ethic. In your opinion, by analyzing various existing factors, how can AI technology provide benefits? And I mean, it's related to improving human resource capabilities, especially for young people, not only in terms of competence, but also in terms of inclusive rules, analytical thinking, and mental health, in order to achieve the goal of Golden Indonesia 2045. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot. I mean, absolutely relevant question. I wanted to pick out the point that you mentioned about mental health, because what is really interesting is that the latest research in this area really shows that at least for relatively light cases of, let's say depression or mental issues, you can actually use these tools quite productively to address some of these issues. So I think that, again, we need to carefully look into these tools and see to what extent they can help us with specific issues that we have, whether it's public health, whether it's education delivery, etc. I don't think that these tools are a threat at all. I think yes, they can be misused. They have been misused, and we certainly need to kind of make sure that we look into this carefully. But at the same time, they do provide essential services that can help us adjust and adapt to the changes that are coming, especially when you mentioned education, especially skills provisioning. Again, I do believe that having these tools and having an educational approach to using these tools will help, especially young people, and I mean really young people, like children under the age of 10 or so, to actually benefit from them if they're properly being accompanied and introduced to use these tools. Obviously, you shouldn't leave them without supervision. There are all kinds of dangers on the internet, as we all know, but having these tools and allowing kids to actually play with them and gain an experience early on is really beneficial and can, provide educational services, language services, early reading skills, early improving your verbal expression, etc., is really essential. And these tools can do enormous benefit. It can deliver enormous benefits at a much lower cost for governments. Rather than having a teacher standing every time, you actually have some of these tools to deliver the same type of services much more effectively. So I would encourage you looking into this. Again, it's not a broad-based kind of recommendation, but rather something that each government ministry needs to look carefully and see. So what are the applications where it makes sense to use these tools? How can we implement them in order to provide our services at a much lower cost and with much better benefits to our population?
All right, thank you very much, Eckhard, for the answer. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, all participants, for all the great questions and discussion with Eckhard. And we are so sorry, since there are so many questions and the limited time that we have, we cannot read all the questions in the Zoom chat and also in the YouTube chat. Well, all right, Eckhard, now would you like to give a closing statement to conclude all the session?
Yeah, no, thanks a lot. And first of all, thanks again for this wonderful webinar and extremely well organized. I wanted to just highlight again what I was concluding with my previous answer, is that we really need to kind of look carefully into these benefits that these technologies offer, not underestimating any risk that it has, but also, taking advantage of it. The possibility for these technologies, if they're properly being used, to enhance skills provisioning, to make our industries or our economies more productive, and to deliver public services at a lower cost and with much, much higher benefits are enormous. That requires sector-specific expertise that we should build up in our ministries, in our public institutions, in order to be able to identify where the right approach is, where the right angle of attack is. I do believe that if we do that, we can take advantage of it. Don't leave it to the tech companies to decide for you how to use the technology. You should be in charge. You should take advantage of these technologies and identify where you can best use them. That doesn't require some investment into your own expertise, but I think that this is not something that you cannot overcome, that you cannot achieve. And if you do that, you will certainly take advantage of these technologies to the benefit of your population.
Well, thank you very much, Eckhard, for the very insightful session with us today. And ladies and gentlemen, please give a big hand to Eckhard. Thank you once again for making time, Eckhard.
Thanks for having me. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have very fruitful discussion today, and now we come to the end of the CommentQ Learning Week Day 1. To all participants who join us today, we would like to say thank you for your participation. And once again, please do fill the evaluation form by scanning the QR code in the screen below, okay? And then you can click the link in the chat box to give feedback and to get a certificate. Well, ladies and gentlemen, stay safe and stay healthy. See you tomorrow on CommentQ Learning Week Day 2 with the theme Innovating for the Planet, Policy Making for Sustainability with Richard Sammons, Senior Economic Advisor to the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. I'm Nela. Good day and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.